What's good, YouTube? It's YN360 and today we're going to be talking about Canon's announcement of the EOS R5 and EOS R6. Let's get into it. Well, today is the day, and Canon seems to have kept their promises here, or did they? I'll be honest, and like most people, I looked at the rumor sites beforehand and pretty much already knew the specs. As much as I like knowing what's coming, though, I really think that rumor sites really spoil the surprise. So anyhow, I'm not going to get too technical here and read every spec, but I'm going to touch on the important stuff. So Canon today announced the EOS R5 and R6, which are the successors to the EOS R and the EOS RP, though I do think that those cameras will still be available. So the star of the show, of course, was the EOS R5, which has 45 megapixels, an ISO range up to 51,200 natively, dual pixel AF version 2 with 100% coverage, which means that it just covers the whole sensor. 20 frames per second electronic and 12 frames per second mechanical. The viewfinder has 5.7 million dots, which is pretty good, and it also keeps the top LCD from the EOS R, but tosses out the multi-function bar in exchange for a nice joystick as well as the spinning wheel. So yeah, if you're a Canon shooter, you'd be happy to know that those things are there. And the EOS R, that was just a really bad decision on Canon's part. The ergonomics overall, of course, are much better. You get dual card slots, which are one CF Express, one SD UHS 2. So it's good to have those two card slots now. The one thing we all wanted and knew this camera would have is IBIS. It claims, up to 5 stops or 8 stops if you have IS lenses, but we'll have to see in the real world how that kind of works out. And I assume that it doesn't support EF lenses with IS. Now on the video side of things, this is where people had high expectations. You do get the rumored 8K up to 30p in RAW, so Canon didn't let anyone down there. However, for some that was disappointing because they wanted 4K RAW as seen on the rumor sites. I'll say that I wish it had RAW 2 and 4K, but maybe Atomos can fix that, or maybe a firmware update down the line. Outside of RAW though, you get 8K up to 30p, 4K up to 120p, and then the 1080p modes up to 60p. Anything under 1080, I'm not sure why they're even there anymore. Camera companies, you can probably leave those things out. I don't know who is shooting those modes, or let them enable them, but just keep them out of my menus and not being cluttered up. Again, I don't know what other modes are still in there, like 720p or anything. But anyhow, one of the best features of this camera is now that it is a 10-bit camera internally. Before, you could get 10-bit with the EOS R, but you had to do it externally. It only did 8-bit internally. So 8K RAW, of course, is 12-bit, so that's awesome. However, the data rates are just insane, so I hope you have some good storage. For those that like to shoot externally, though, the camera only supports 4K output up to 60p. That means no 8K out or 4K 120 out of the HDMI. So those are just some of the limitations, I think, of HDMI itself. But the fact that Canon does not allow for 1080p out of the HDMI is a little crazy to me. And although Sony has removed recording limits on their new cameras, the EOS R5 still has the 29-minute, 59-second limit. Last but not least, the EOS R5 will be priced at $38.99 for body only. And honestly, for what you're getting, that's a good price. I had guessed $37.99, and that is pretty close. And now that we have that out of the way, let's look at the little brother that was also announced, which is the R6. The main differences here are that you get a 20 megapixel sensor instead of 45. The ISO range is a bit better natively, up to 102,400. 102,400. But both cameras expand up to 204,800. It has the same autofocus, continuous shooting speeds, and IBIS. However, it only has 3.69 million dots on the viewfinder, but that's not really that big of a difference. You do not get the top-down screen. Instead, you get a mode dial, which I personally prefer. I hated having to hit info, switch to video mode, and back and back and back. So that, I wish that was an option on the R5, honestly. because I never used my top-down screen on the EOS R. You get dual UHS-2 SD slots and 4K 60s, but you do not get any RAW functionality on the EOS R6. The interesting thing here is that the R6 does get 1080 120, which the R5 does not have. It does shoot internal 10-bit 4K and 1080p, but again, only 4K up to 60 out of the HDMI. The good news is that Atomos also announced today that they support the R5 and R6 4K 10-bit out to 422 ProRes or DNX formats. Hopefully ProRes RAW is somewhere down the pipeline. Come on, Atomos. Come on, Canon. The EOS R6 comes in at $24.99, which is about the same price as the EOS R came in originally, which then dropped to like $22.99 and then $14.99 and then $12.99 for a sale. Now Canon did announce some other stuff, but it's not really interesting to me, like printers and lenses and stuff like that, so I'm not really going to touch on those, but I'll leave a link to the press release if you want to see that. So now we have the R5, the R6, so where does that leave the EOS R? I honestly think that Canon will officially drop the EOS R down to about $12.99 or $14.99 in order to keep that camera as an entry-level option for those that are just moving in the full frame. They might keep the RP, but the EOS R is a lot more similar to the other cameras, and to me is just an overall better camera. It is still a really good stills camera and a good video camera, so it would be smart to offer it as an entry-level option. I think you will see a lot of EOS R cameras on the used market here soon and can probably pick one up for a deal, but that does put the RP in a bad place, and honestly, like I said, I think Canon should just phase that camera out and not produce it anymore, and just let the EOS R take that spot. In my opinion though, the R6 will be the more popular camera with more sales, only because it has the same photography functions as the R5 without the extra storage needed for the 45 megapixels. And if you don't need 8K RAW, which most people don't, the internal video is going to be just fine. The R5 will definitely be most popular amongst the video shooters needing 8K RAW, 4K 120s, and those that just need 45 megapixels. And personally, I would opt for the R5, but I think I'm going to hold out a little bit. I think this camera is going to be heavily back ordered, and once it is available, I'd expect the price to drop around $34.99 in 8 months or so, or maybe a year on the used market. And by then, who knows? Maybe we'll see an A7S4, maybe we'll see an A7 IV for that matter. I think we will, but I think it'll be very disappointing. I think the bigger question for you is, would you pay $1,300 USD for an upgrade that includes 8K RAW, 4K 120p, and 25 more megapixels? I mean, of course, there are other small differences, but that's the big features there. But if you need low light, you probably want to stick with the R6. Even if you aren't a Canon fan, you have to be pretty excited that they actually came through, because this is going to kick Sony into gear. They will need to redesign their Series 4 cameras in a way that puts them into competition with the EOS R5. The A7R4 is a little out of the question because it's already available, and when it comes to competing video-wise, they'll have to get the A7 IV to compete with the R6 and the A7S4 to compete with the R5. So I'm thinking the S4 will probably have a lot more megapixels than it normally would have. And I mean, there's really no way around it for Sony if they want to stay relevant, you know, in the coming years. The only thing Sony has on their side right now is that Canon's release cycle seems to be a lot longer than Sony's, but Sony's been slacking lately, and I feel like, you know, they're scrambling to make changes behind the scenes, you know, dragging out, and now they must counter or just, you know, risk losing a lot of Sony users who may jump ship. And on that note, I've seen a bunch of A7 IIIs and EOS Rs go on the used market today, so that's just telling you something right there. And that may be a bunch of Canon guys that flip to Sony that are just trying to go back now that they've waited it out. All right guys, so I'm pretty excited about this, and I know a lot of you are as well. I wish I was able to actually get my hands on the camera, but you have to start somewhere, and I'm not a big YouTuber right now, so that's kind of hard to do. So if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this, hit the notification bell if that's something you're into, or leave a comment and I'll get back to you immediately. I do have a lot of content in the pipeline, and that also includes some giveaways. So once I get past the 1,000 mark, I am going to do some giveaways just for passing 1,000. And yeah, I mean, that's about it. So let me know in the comments down below, do you plan on getting the R5, R6? If so, why? If not, why as well? That's a wrap.